And here we go. Okay, good evening and God bless everyone. It's good to be with here tonight as we continue in Foundations in Genesis on Thursday, February 20th, 2025. Just a brief recap of last week. We read about Jacob traveling south, from Gilead, and he encountered a camp. He had just left for making that covenant with Laban, and they made the standing stone there. You don't cross this place. We don't go back, So they made this agreement. Laban kissed his family goodbye, didn't kiss Jacob, but that's okay. And so Jacob takes the crew and he heads south and he encounters that camp of angels. And that was very comforting to him. It showed him that God is with him. He'd been through kind of a rough time there with Laban in those situations, and now he's moving to where he needed to go. And he sent out messengers to Esau. He wants to reconcile with his brother Esau. He's got a twin brother who was just a little bit older than him, and he wanted to make amends. And they hadn't seen each other for 20 years. So Jacob's a little bit anxious because they did not part on good terms, as you know. There's a little bit of bad blood. Their mom got involved and she played favorites and all kinds of weird stuff that's what happened. So that's past. He's grown now, and but he's anxious. So he sends messengers out to Esau, and he finds out that his army is approaching, around 400 men. And so what did he do? He was frightened. So good lesson for us. He prayed a very honest prayer, laid it out to God, and you can see as we move through the chapter how God did answer that prayer. He was wise. He divided his big clan into three groups. He figured that if he was attacked, some could escape that way. If they were all in one bunch, it would be tough. So he had them travel in three separate groups. The first group you might recall was the two slave girls, right? Bilhah and Zilpah and their children. And then the second group and their clans, people, animals. And then the second group was Leah and her family, and last but not least was Rachel and her young son Joseph. She'd only had one child at this time, plus all the servant girls and men and the different animals. But he's going to prepare to meet his brother here in a little bit. So in preparation for Esau, he sets aside a generous gift, and we went through all that, hundreds of all kinds of livestock, and getting ready. And then we also read about the wrestling of Jacob with the angel. And during that struggle, he was injured and he walked with a limp for a while. And those kosher butchers to this day now take the sciatic nerve, remembering that injury that Jacob acquired when he was wrestling from the angel. And while he's with the angel, he gets a new name. God, through the angel, names him Israel. And so that's when Israel first started with Jacob. So you have it in Jacob and his sons, which he's only has 11 so far. He's got 11 sons and one daughter. And Dinah is going to come center stage here in a very difficult situation here in the next chapter, not this one. So let's go into Genesis chapter 3 tonight. We're going to go through this chapter and we'll see how far we get. We may go into 34. We'll just have to watch the clock. So let's go to, and I'll be sharing tonight from the REV Bible, Revised English Version. And we're going to start in chapter 33, and we're going to be in verse 1. Let me get my screen so it shares properly. So you can look at your own Bible app or, on stuff if that works for you. And when I study these, I use a variety of sources, and a couple of them are the REV commentary. And thanks to Claire, I used Dennis Prager's commentary on Genesis has been helpful as well. So look at verse 10. So Jacob said, let's go up to verse 1. Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and with him were 400 men. So he divided the children between Leah, Rachel, and the two female slaves, as was depicted and I just discussed with you. So He put the female slaves and their children in front, then Leah and her children after them, and Rachel and Joseph after them. He himself advanced in front of them now. He had been in the past. If you remember, he was in the very back, and that's when he had the wrestling match with the angel, and he came out okay on that. And so he's out in the front now of all three groups, and he meets his brother. So he comes to Esau, he bows to the ground 7 times as he came near his brother. And this is quite an honor, quite a change in attitude. This is the man that 20 years ago or so was selling his getting a birthright for a pot of lentils and stealing his blessing from his father with a deception with the help of his mother. Now he's a different guy, at least in part. People do change. And like all of us, sometimes it goes back and forth. But right now, he's being very humble. And Esau is being very gracious. Esau runs to meet him and embraced him and hugged his neck and kissed him, and they both wept. So this is exactly what Jacob had wanted, and he had prayed for. And this is quite a change here on this. What had happened here? Um, a difference here. Now, this is going to go back again. Let's just quickly, we're going to go over to Genesis chapter 27. Go to 27. And you're going to recall this because just a few weeks ago we went over this. But this is at the time when Isaac is giving the blessing, in this verse 29, over Jacob. And this is what he says a bunch of things here. I'm not going to read the whole blessing, but let people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be master over your brothers. And this is not only going to include, because he only had the one brother, Esau, but brothers in the larger sense as well. Let your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you. So you can see that this is a switch here, and it's going to go back, but this is a time of reconciliation and graciousness to make amends with his brother, long lost. Then he lifted up his eyes. This is he as being Esau. He lifted up his eyes and he saw the women and the children, and he said, "Who are these with you?" So he sees all these people. And who are they with you? And he said, the children whom God has graciously given your servant. Very beautifully spoken, shows humbleness and graciousness, giving God the glory. Very wonderful statement here. And it seems as though that time is healing all wounds. We probably know that you probably dealt with situations in your past and had been at odds, and then it's not. In one of my family members, I had a family member that didn't speak to me for 7 years. And this is not immediate family. And then one day it just changed. Everything was different. It's like it never happened. And we took up right where we left off. And this can happen. This happened to take 20 years. But the fact is not how long it took, but that it did indeed take. Esau was portrayed as someone who didn't care much about spiritual matters. He was more of a man of the earth. However, he was never depicted as a wicked person, but he did hold a grudge. We read about that right after the time he was going to come after Jacob after his father died. But it seems now that he's buried the hatchet. And this is a phrase that we've used in relationships before. You maybe have had a situation where you just had to bury the hatchet and move on. You couldn't agree, but you agreed to disagree. Let's move on. Life is short. Let's look in Genesis 5 here. We just finished. Now, he refers to Esau as my Lord here in this verse 5. And he's very gracious, and he calls himself Esau's servant. While younger brothers are expected to show this deference, this is beyond customary. And the bowing 7 times. So he's really being very humble. And it seems as though Esau appreciates this. In verse 6, the female slaves came near with their children and they bowed down. So they're kind of watching, they're following Jacob's lead here. And you'll recall he had coached them on how to deal with this meeting. So they were very clear that Jacob wanted to make amends. Now, this group where it says the female slaves came near, this would have been the two slaves that were the servants of Rachel and Leah, and their names were Bilhah and Zelpah. So that's who these, and they bowed too. And then Leah also, and her children came near, and they bowed. And then after them, Joseph came near with Rachel, and they bowed down. And this Joseph was probably pretty young. He may have even been nursing, and they would nurse children for several years, unlike now, they would go 3 or 4 years sometimes. So they bowed down. And in verse 7, okay, we got that. Verse 8, and Esau said, what do you mean by all these herds? I've met this herd. What is this? Jacob said, these are to find favor in your eyes of my Lord. So this is the gift, the ones that we read about. And so Jacob didn't beat around the bush. He didn't say, oh, I just had a few extra, thought you could use them. He's very, very honest. I want to find favor in your eyes. I want things to go well between us. He makes his intentions clear. It's a very honest, straightforward answer. And then as we look at Esau, but Esau said, I have an abundance, my brother. Let what you have be yours. Esau, he comes back with honesty as well. This is wonderful. And he's really kind of honorable because he could have said, oh, here's some easy wealth. All these animal livestock, they're very valuable. I think I'll just take them. But he didn't think that way. He says, I've got plenty. You just keep them. And in verse 10, let's read that. Jacob said, no, please. If I have found favor in your eyes, then receive my present from my hand, because I have seen your face. This was in his prayer, his desire to make amends, which is like seeing the face of God, and you have received me favorably. It's not that he saw God or Esau look like God, but he saw the face of God in that he saw God was in this. He was working in this situation. So he's known that God had intervened and helped. In verse 11, please take the blessing that I have brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have all I need. So he urged him, and Esau finally took it. So this is a wonderful thing. If any of you have experienced reconciliation with family members, whether close up family or distant, it is such a wonderful, wonderful blessing. Your heart just soars with gratitude and thanksgiving because you're reconciled. You kind of I think about the parable of the um, forgiving father and the two prodigal sons, and how the father ran to meet that prodigal son, and how he kissed him and hugged him and put on the robe and the signet ring and the wonder, and then they threw a big party. So, and then and it also says when one is saved, the angels rejoice in heaven. It's a big deal. Relationships are important, and when we can make them go well, it's good. It blesses everybody. And I know there's some relationships that don't seem like they're ever going to go well, but as long as we're alive and the other person is alive, there always is hope for reconciliation. Okay, and in verse uh, 11 or 12, sorry, Esau said, let's begin our journey and go. Now, this beginning the journey here is kind of neat because it's pulling up tent stakes. And so they pulled up, he wanted to pull up the tent stakes and go, Jacob had just wanted this blessing to be on him with this gift. and Esau feels good. They're both happy. And so pull up the tent stakes and go. And before I move on too far, you'll notice in verse 11, it says, please take the blessing. Well, the last time, we were talking about blessings between these guys, Jacob was conniving to get the blessing from his father. Now, Jacob is giving a blessing to his son. So I think that's an interesting point that should be made. And he's not making excuses. He's not saying, I'm sorry about what I did, or he's not going into the details. He's not making excuses for what he did, but he is giving this blessing. He's being generous, and he's wanting to make these amends. And in Genesis 12 here, I'm sorry, yeah, verse 12 here of 33, we read that. And then verse 13, but Jacob said to him, my Lord knows that the children are quite young. So this is Jacob's response to Esau saying, let's go, and I'll go with you. My children are quite young. Well, they should, they're right. Probably his oldest son, maybe 12 or 13. Remember, they've been gone 20 years. Took 7 years before he had his first wife. Should have been Rachel, ended up Leah. And then 7 more years. And then, you know, um, so you see where the oldest could be around. You can do the math, maybe 12 or 13. And then he's got 11 sons. So all the way down to maybe little Joseph could be just a few years old. And they're out here traveling, and so they can't take it. They're quite young. Actually, the Hebrew says soft. And the flocks and the herds with me are nursing their young. They've got baby lambs and baby calves with the cattle, the oxen. They can't take it. If you drive them too hard for even a day, they could die. So Jacob's being very honest. I can't move as fast as you guys, so I can't go with you. And then in verse 14, it's kind of interesting. Please let my Lord go ahead of his servant. Again, he's deferring to his older brother. I will lead my flocks on slowly, according to the pace of the livestock that are before me, and according to the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord, not in Seir, but toward Seir. So Jacob is using one of his techniques before. He's not being real definite. He's being unclear. He's not. He isn't saying to Esau, "I'm not going to Seir." Now, Seir is the same as Moab. It's another name for Moab. He's going to go toward, and we're going to see how this plays out. So he's a little bit vague here. And so Esau said, well, let me leave with you some of the men who are with me. He had what, 400? That's pretty large, isn't it? Possibly they were anticipating difficulties along the way. And then he wanted to give some to Jacob, to help them out. But Jacob defers. He really doesn't want them, and he's very gracious and kindly declines. And he said, why do that? My Lord has already been kind enough. And then in verse 16, so Esau returned that day going on his way to Seir. So Esau heads on back, and Jacob travels to Succoth. Now, and he builds himself a house and made shelters for his livestock. So the name of the place is called Succoth. At the time he shows up there, it's not called Succoth, but the word Hebrew Succoth means booths or shelters. And this suggests that Jacob maybe would have stayed there long enough to build a house rather than living in a tent, though we don't know how long he was in Succoth. And Succoth, this area that he stopped, was very close to Shechem, which is where he planned to go. So I'm going to bring up a screen here and let you take a look. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. And I'm going to bring up a map, which I showed to you not long ago. But I think it's good always to get geography, and it helps us with our understanding. Now, I'm going to share. Last time there's a little problem, so if you don't see what I'm sharing, let me know. But you should see this map. Yeah, it looks like it's working. Okay, this map is Jacob's journey to Haran and back. Now this is, this we went through this a few chapters ago, but you can see his path up here to Haran. And Haran and is now considered to be here. At one time, it was thought to be way down here near the Gulf, this Gulf area here, but it's the newer archaeological dig shows that was here. Hadaram, you know that word in Haran. This is where Abraham's family originated from when they first headed out to Canaan. And then this is the route that Jacob took back to get to see Laban, and ended up with two wives and two slave girl wives. So this is how he goes up and he comes down. Now we're going to find out where he is right now. And if you'll recall, I'm going to zoom in here. He did the standing stone in Gilead because Laban chased him all the way down here and wanted to take his wives, which were Laban's daughters, back. And so they met somewhere in Gilead. Well, you can see here's the Sea of Galilee right up here. This is the Mediterranean over here. And then you've got the Dead Sea down here. So in between these two bodies of water is Gilead, where they met. Now he traveled from Gilead. He wanted to go see his brother. So and you remember this city, we read about this last week, this Peniel was right here. And this blue line shows where Esau came to meet him. So he meets him right here at the crossing of the Jabbok River. Here's the river here. And so they met probably just on the south side of that river. Then they have their discussion, the gifts are exchanged. And so they kind of say goodbye. And Esau wanted them to travel back to Moab. And you can see here's Moab right here. Moab is to the west of the Dead Sea. This is also called, here you can see a mountain here, Mount Seir, but Moab and Seir are the same area. And so going back up here, we just read the word Succoth, and this is where the booths were. And you don't see a dot here, but it's right in this area. And that's where he stayed a while, apparently long enough to build a house, but we don't know how long. Then he's going to move up to Shechem, and there's Shechem. So that gives you an idea. Bethlehem's down here, and this is still the land of Canaan, of course. And Gaza is over here along the Mediterranean, and Joppa and the different famous towns below. But what we're focusing on now is Moab, Gilead, and Succoth and Shechem. So I'm going to stop sharing my map, and then we're going to go back to get my REV set up here again. I'll minimize this, and then we'll go back to the REV. So Jacob traveled to Succoth, which was right there. Sometimes they spell it with a double K, sometimes a double C on the map. It was a double C. And then in verse 28, Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem. And I just showed you Shechem. And from our pictures I took when we were in the Holy Land, or the Bible lands, this is an area of Shechem. Shechem. This is an old city, and this is where some more events are going to occur as we get into the next chapter. These are some of the architectural remains of the city. You can't make out a whole lot here. This is now a city of Shechem here, which is up on the mountainside, but this is some of the remains of a very old city in Israel. And poppies grow there. And this is from where we were standing. We're standing in the remains. And these are the two mountains where centuries later, Moses is going to bring the children of Israel and have one group be on one mountain and one group on the other mountain. They're going to shout curses off of one mountain and blessings on another. And the word Shechem means shoulder. And the idea is that this is kind of a shoulder area in between these two mountains. So we'll go back to Genesis here. So the city of Shechem that is in the land of Canaan. And when he came from Padam Aram, which I just showed you, that's up there near Haran, I got his wife and he camped before the city. He bought, now this is a little bit unclear to me. I don't have a lot of detail on it, but somewhere along the line, he buys this, and this is going to be future. We're going to get into uh, Hammer and Shechem's father. And Shechem is the name of a person. Now, the city isn't necessarily named after Shechem, the person, the son of Hammer. It's named because of the shoulder, and that name wasn't given for a while. But he bought a parcel of land, and there he erected an altar and called it El Elohi Israel. And so this means God, the God of Israel. And it's kind of interesting here. Uh, it talks about him coming safely, and he now has peace with God. He had made this commitment a long time ago about if you will be. The Hebrew word is translated safely, really means pay. This right here is peace. Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan. And we're going to just flip over to Genesis 28 here quickly, because this was a promise, a vow between God and um, Jacob. Let's look in verse 20, and you may recall us reading this. And Jacob vowed a vow. Now, this is when he was in Bethel and he did the standing stone. And Jacob vowed a vow, saying, if God be with me and will watch over me in this way that I'm going, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then Yahweh will be my God. And that's what's happening. Yahweh is his God. He's coming in peace to the land. And we see those vows, and that Jacob was faithful to his vow, and Yahweh was his God. And he makes that statement when he erects this altar, and he calls it God, the God of Israel. And of course, Jacob's name is now Israel. Another way to translate it is the God of Israel is God. So this is kind of a cool way to end this chapter in peace and with the vows being fulfilled. Now, we're going to see, and we check my time, and we got some time here. We're going to get started in the book, the next chapter. We'll see how far we get. I'm not going to keep you up late. Now we're going to go into chapter 34. That's the next chapter. And verse 1. Now Dinah is going to come front and center. Now this is kind of a weird and tragic story of Dinah. And we'll just get into it, and we'll try to unpack this and see what we can make out of it. I think there's some good truths in here. There always are in God's word, things that we can learn. We just have to pray and see the depth of it. Dinah, the daughter of Leah. Okay, Leah had 4 sons, and Dinah was her 5th born child, whom she had born to Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. Now, she's not just being a rebellious, she's just going out. And normally women traveled with women, and maybe she wanted to be with some people her own age, women her own age. She had 10, what she have, 11 brothers. My goodness. My wife had 4, and they were a lot for her to deal with. So here Leah has all these brothers. Maybe she wants to have some female company. It doesn't say. Now Shechem, now this is the young man, the heir apparent to the son of Hamor, the Hivite, who was the leader of the land. Now, Hivite, this was a tribe of descending of Canaan. You probably remember the Hivites were descendants. And this is Noah's grandson was Canaan, and this is one of Canaan's kids. The Hivites were, at least that tribe became part of one of Canaan's offsprings. So Shechem the son, so he's there in Canaan, and he's the ruler of the land. His dad is, Hamor is, and Shechem seized her, and lay with her by force, and that means exactly what you think it means. So this is a very traumatic situation, a horrible situation that happened to Dinah. That this man, who was a prince, so to speak, an heir apparent to his father, just took her and forcibly had sex with her. And of course, that's called rape. And it's kind of interesting how this develops. In the next verse says, his soul was strongly attached to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to the young woman. Now, this is strange because normally that's not at all what happens. The victim, the perpetrator and the victim, normally they have nothing to do with the victim anymore. And there's few events that tell us what really happened, few details to this event. You know, Dinah would have been with a group of men because they didn't mingle with men. They would stay together. Maybe the women felt powerless to stop Shechem, the ruler's son. It doesn't really say. But after Shechem raped Dinah, the text says he loved her. And this is unusual because typically a rapist would have no further regard for this victim. Yet Shechem desired to marry Dinah and spoke tenderly to her. Then he goes on from there in verse 4. He asks his father, so Shechem spoke to his father, saying, "Get me this girl as a wife." Now, this is interesting here. So this girl, this could be a young woman. The word that's used here can be translated either way. Probably a young girl, Dinah, because this is not an old family. She's probably a marriaging age, probably a young teenager. He says, "Get me this girl as a wife, not to be my wife, but as a wife," which kind of makes us think more than one. This maybe isn't his first. Maybe he's gathering a harem. "Get me this girl as a wife." And Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah, his daughter, but his sons were with the livestock in the field. So Jacob kept silent until they came. That doesn't mean he didn't tell his kids. Most likely he sent a messenger out to them, but he didn't say anything to Shechem or his father yet. So that he's going to wait for the boys to get home. So in the next verse. So Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him, and the sons of Jacob came in from the field when they heard. And so they're all have a get together here. The men were grieved. That means the brothers were grieved. And these were young men. These aren't old men. These are young upper teenage guys who are working there, grieved, and were very angry because he had done a disgraceful thing against Israel. Israel would have been Jacob, in lying with Jacob's daughter, a thing that should not be done. That's absolutely true. It should not have been done. It was disgusting that he would do something like that. So what happens next? So Hamor spoke with him. So the father speaks. Now this is very typical in marriage situations at that time. Marriages were arranged and the parents arranged for them. So he would speak first. And he says, "The soul of my son longs for your daughter." Well, it did more than that, but this is what he's saying. "Please give her to him as a wife." Again, we have this terminology. "Make marriage alliances with us. Give your daughters to us and take our daughters for yourselves and live with us. The land will be before you. Live and trade in it and acquire possessions in it." So he's laying out this kind of all this extravagance to kind of appease Jacob and his sons to overlook the situation. And they're going to say, well, maybe they'll overlook it if we offer money, trade, possessions. We'll all get along. We'll have an alliance. We'll be stronger because we're all together. So this is kind of what's going on here. So in verse 11, "If I find favor," Shechem said to her father and to her brothers, "Let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you ask of me, I will give you." Now it's interesting, this word "you" is in the plural. So he's not just talking to Jacob, he's talking to Jacob and the brothers. He says, "Make the bride price." Now the bride price was probably pretty common, pretty an acceptable price, in their culture. But the second would be a marriage gift. So the bride price is probably whatever the custom, the culture required. But the marriage gift, as great as you want. What do you want? "And I will give you whatever you ask, but give me the young woman as a wife." Now, this is what Shechem is saying. He says, we got a lot of money, we got a lot of stuff here. You name your price, I want her. Now it's kind of interesting that she apparently is being held hostage in Shechem with their family. We don't, well, we'll learn that later on in the chapter. The sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor, his father, deceitfully. They weren't very happy about this at all. And so because they had defiled their little sister, they're going to be upset, and spoke and said to them, uh, so this is what he said. Now the boys are saying to them, we cannot do this thing to give you our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that is a disgrace to us. So it almost sounds like they had been plotting here what they were going to do at this meeting. They had plenty of time to think on their way back from the herds before they reached Jacob and talk about all the stuff that was going on. But they seem to have a plan here. And it's very interesting because the covenant of circumcision was started with Abraham and then Isaac and now with Jacob and Jacob's sons. So they know about circumcision. So they'll say, we can't give it to you. You're just a bunch of uncircumcised, people, and you're outside the covenant. We can't give our little sister away. That'd be a disgrace. So this is interesting here, how they got some deceitful intentions in mind. So the sons, and he said in verse 15, well, we will consent to you only on this condition. If you will be like us by having every male among you be circumcised. So this is what it's going to take. So that is the condition. They're not talking about marriage gifts and bride prices and all that stuff. We want you to get your men circumcised. If you do that, then you can have her. Then we will give you our daughters, and not only her, but others, and we'll make this alliance. And we will take your daughters to us, and we will live with you, and we will become one people. So we're going to, we'll go for what your deal was. But if you will not listen to us to be circumcised, then we will take our sister and go. So there it is, black and white. That's the deal. You're going to do it or not. And so that's what that was the deal, so to speak. And so the negotiations take place. So they all go on down. We'll see where they're going to go now. So Hamor, so the words pleased Hamor and Shechem. They say, okay, what's a big deal? It's just a circumcision. We get her, and then they're going to stay with us, and then all this stuff will be good. And you'll see how this develops here. The young men did not delay to do this thing because he desired Jacob's daughter. He was the most respected of all the household of his father. That's talking about Shechem. So Hamor and Shechem, his son, went to the gate of their city and spoke to the men of their city, saying, these men are at peace with us. Let us, now they're talking about Jacob and his sons. Therefore, let them live in the land and trade in it. Look, the land is large enough for them. Let's take their daughters as wives for ourselves, and let's give them our daughters. But the men will consent to us to live with us and to become one people only on this condition. If every male among us is circumcised as they are circumcised. So here, you got all these guys stroking their beards, thinking, okay, Shechem gets a new wife, and that we got to do this. So what's in it for us? And so here it comes, verse 23. Won't their livestock and their possessions and all their animals become ours? Oh, okay. So we're going to look at a little bit of greed here. Let's just consent to them and they will live with us. It's not a big deal. So Shechem is really throwing a heavy duty sales pitch here, and he wins. He gets them all going. Must be a persuasive guy. So this is what happens. Verse 24. All who went out of the gate of the city listened to Hamor and Shechem, his son, and every male was circumcised all who went out of the gate of the city. Now, these would be the fighting men, the men of reputation. This wouldn't be every last person, every kid, every old man in the city, but these, as you can say, the men of the gate, those who went out of the gate. Those are the people who left the city would have been the fighters, the ones that could do it. And so all these guys are circumcised, all that went out the gate. But on the third day, this is the 3 days after the circumcision. Remember, babies were circumcised on the eighth day. Uh, that was part of the covenant, and that's when the time was the best time to do it. But these are teenagers and men that have gotten circumcised, and on the third day, they're sore. The wound is sore. They didn't have alcohol and antiseptics, and if you've ever gotten a splinter or a little cut and you didn't treat it well, it gets sore. And this, of course, is a very tender area. And so they were sore. But it's kind of interesting. There's some unanswered questions here. Two of Jacob's sons, now he had four sons, but two of them, these two guys who are named, who are the Simeon, and I'll come across the other name here. It's going to show up here pretty soon. Simeon and Levi. We're getting close to it. Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword, came into an unsuspecting city, and killed all the males. Wow. Two guys go in and kill all the males. They killed Hamor and Shechem, his son, with the mouth of the sword, took Dinah, see Dinah was being held there out of Shechem's house, and went away. Lots of unanswered questions here. They led the attack and killed all the males. Now Shechem's actions were horrific toward the sister, but the brother's response seems pretty extreme. They hold this entire city accountable for the rape of one man. And so that's what I was talking about when Jim brought up about loving your enemies. This is where God kind of clears this up in the future, what the capital punishment is for rape, and about loving your enemies. This open hostility and massacring a whole bunch of people is just out of whack. It's disproportionate. So this is what happens. So, okay, later this will have consequences. But they killed them, and that's what happened. They took their sister. And Jacob's sons, now we got more, came upon the slain and plundered the city that they had defiled. So we got more of the sons coming in now. Now they're going to go and plunder it. They're going to take everything that's valuable. They took their flocks and their herds, their donkeys, and whatever in the city, and whatever is in the field, and all their wealth. They took captive their little ones and their wives. They took as plunder everything in their houses. This is pretty severe. This is disproportionate. And later on, God will set this straight about loving enemies. He'll deal with capital punishment. He'll deal with this because this is a part of sin nature that was just really going out of whack. And Jacob said so the dad talks to Simeon and Levi, you have caused trouble for me, making me stink to the inhabitants of this land. When they hear about this, they're going to say that is out of whack. This was disproportionate. And to the Canaanites and the Perizzites, they're going to just really be upset. He says, I'm few in number. We don't have a great big army here. If these guys come and attack us, they will gather together against me and strike me down, and I will be destroyed, I and my house. So Jacob moves into thinking about himself again. And, that's what happens. But he was worried that the people that they stole here from Hamor and Shechem, those slaves, they would probably, once they saw that Jacob's house was being attacked, they'd probably turn on them and fight on the sides of Jacob's enemy. And so that's what Jacob was, his concern was probably valid, but the fact that he, did this, he was very concerned about it. But he starts to focus on himself again, and that's not really what needed to be done, because God had promised to bless Abraham, to bless Jacob, and that his descendants would be like the sands of the sea. But the brother's response was very short and to the point, and they still are saying, should he treat our sister like a prostitute? And no way. So they got their vengeance, and that's what they did. So, an interesting state of affairs here, how people live and how God still works with people. These kids, these guys who did all this stuff, end up being the 12 tribes of Israel. These are the guys that are going to father the tribes of Israel. And later on, we're going to see how they dealt with their brother Joseph not too well either. Yeah, most of you probably already know the story about how Joseph got sold off as a slave, but that's a wonderful story, a wonderful record we'll get to before long, a great story of forgiveness and reconciliation again. So we get to see the good, bad, and the ugly and these things way back then. So Heavenly Father, thank you for how you share so many great truths of your word to us. It's a delight to see your word and to learn from it, to see the graciousness of Esau and Jacob, how they made amends and did well, and then how they dealt with this situation with Dinah, which they did not handle it in an admirable way, even though it's horrific. God instructs them in the future on how to deal with these things better. So thank you for this night, for this group of people here, for blessing us, healing us, keeping us safe, forgiving our sins, for a wonderful night's rest, a great weekend coming up, and with your wonderful love. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen. Let's stop recording.